The chest pain started on a Tuesday morning in March. The air was sharp and cool. One of those mornings where spring pretends it's here, but winter still lingers in the bones of the ground. My breath puffed out in faint white clouds as I stood behind my house with an axe in my hand. Splitting firewood had always been one of those chores that felt like a test, a way to prove to myself I could still do the things I did when I was younger. The stump I used as a splitting block had been there for years, worn flat and gray on top. I set the round in the middle, raised the maul, and brought it down with a solid crack. The log split cleanly, and I felt a small flicker of pride. Then came the pain. It wasn't the kind of ache you get from sore muscles or a stiff back. It hit me like a blade right in the center of my chest, sharp enough to make me drop the handle and stagger back. I sat down hard on the stump, clutching it with both hands while I tried to catch my breath. My lungs felt squeezed, like the air had gone thin around me. At 73, you don't make a fuss over every new pain. You expect your body to creak, to groan, to complain when you push it. I'd been working construction for most of my life. I knew how to deal with soreness, so I told myself, just wait, it'll ease up. And it did, a little. After a few minutes, the stabbing dulled into a steady throb. I sat there, watching my breath fog the air, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Eventually, I picked up the maul and swung again, though not as hard. The wood split, but my chest ached the whole time. By Wednesday, the pain was back, worse than before. Thursday, climbing the stairs left me breathless. I stopped halfway up, one hand on the banister, pretending to look at the old photographs on the wall just so I wouldn't admit to myself that I couldn't make it in one go. There's a certain pride that sticks with you as you age. You don't want to admit weakness. You don't want to admit that the things you've always done are suddenly out of reach. So I lied to myself. It's just a strain, just a pulled muscle. Give it time. Friday morning, my neighbor Helen showed up. She let herself in, like she often did, carrying a bag of groceries. The minute she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, pale and tired, she stopped in her tracks. "George, you look gray," she said flatly, and not the good kind of gray, like distinguished. The kind that makes nurses like me nervous. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just pulled something splitting wood." Helen crossed her arms. She's a retired nurse, and she has a way of staring at you that makes lying impossible. "George Mitchell, you've never pulled anything in the 5 years I've known you. You climbed up on your roof in a storm to patch shingles, for crying out loud. Don't tell me you suddenly can't handle a log of wood." "It's just sore muscles," I muttered. "Bull," she snapped. "You've got chest pain, you're short of breath, and your father and brother both had heart problems. You think I don't know your family history?" She was right. My dad died of a heart attack at 68. My brother Jack had bypass surgery at 70. But I'd always thought of myself as the healthy one, the tough one. The man who worked 45 years of construction without missing much more than a week in all that time. "I don't have insurance that covers every little ER visit," I said weakly. Helen put her hands on her hips. "Medicare covers emergencies. And let me spell it out for you. Chest pain and shortness of breath at your age is an emergency. You want me to call an ambulance?" "Because I will." I sighed. "Helen." "No, don't you?" "Helen me. Get your coat. We're going." I knew better than to argue. Helen wasn't the kind of woman you could talk out of something once her mind was set. 10 minutes later, she had me in her Subaru, driving with tight lips and both hands gripping the wheel like she meant business. The emergency room at St. Mary's was everything I expected on a Friday night. Crowded, loud, the smell of disinfectant hanging over everything. A toddler was crying in one corner. An older man in a pea coat argued with a vending machine. Nurses hustled past, their sneakers squeaking on the tile. The triage nurse took my blood pressure, listened to my symptoms, and then stuck me on a bed in the hallway. I lay there under the bright fluorescent lights, listening to the hum of the machines and the distant sound of someone coughing. Helen sat beside me, her arms crossed, watching me like a hawk to make sure I didn't try to sneak out. 2 hours passed before a doctor came. He looked barely 30, with neat hair and clean scrubs that somehow looked brand new. His name tag read, Dr. Marcus Webb, Emergency Medicine. Mr. Mitchell, he said briskly, I understand you're having chest pain. Yes, started Tuesday, been getting worse. And you're 73? That's right. He glanced over my chart quickly, like a man scanning a grocery list. Then he looked back at me with the kind of calm smile you see in people who think they already know the answer. Well, at your age, chest pain is usually musculoskeletal, he said. Could be arthritis, or maybe you strained something splitting wood. That's very common in men your age. Helen immediately leaned forward. Doctor, he's also short of breath. He couldn't climb the stairs without stopping. Dr. Webb gave her a polite but dismissive glance. Shortness of breath is also common in elderly patients. Reduced lung capacity, natural decline. It's part of the aging process. I frowned. But I've been climbing those stairs for 23 years without a problem. This just started. He smiled in that patient way teachers do with slow students. Mr. Mitchell, bodies change. It can feel sudden, but really it's just age catching up. He pulled out a prescription pad and began writing. I'll give you some anti-inflammatories for the chest wall pain. Take it easy for a few days. No more splitting firewood. Maybe hire someone to do that kind of heavy work. Helen wasn't having it. Doctor, shouldn't you at least run an EKG? Maybe check his cardiac enzymes? Dr. Webb actually chuckled. Ma'am, we don't run expensive cardiac workups on every elderly patient who comes in with chest pain. His presentation is classic for musculoskeletal issues. An EKG and blood work would be unnecessary and costly. Helen's face went red. I worked as a cardiac nurse for 30 years. These are not musculoskeletal symptoms. He has classic cardiac signs, with respect, Webb said smoothly. Medical training prepares us to evaluate symptoms more accurately than lay experience. Based on probability, this isn't cardiac. I looked down at the prescription he handed me. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to believe Helen. Dr. Webb smiled again, already stepping back. Rest, Mr. Mitchell. Accept that some changes are just part of aging. If you have severe chest pain, come back. Otherwise, follow up with your primary care doctor. And just like that, he was gone. Helen sat fuming beside me. That was malpractice, she muttered. I shook my head, exhausted. He's probably right. I'm 73. Maybe it is just age. George, don't you dare brush this off. That young man almost sent you home to die. If your symptoms get worse, if anything changes, you call me immediately. Promise me, I promised, though in my chest I felt the weight of doubt pressing harder than the pain itself. Helen helped me off the bed, and we walked past the nurse's station, past the vending machines and the bulletin board with the faded flyer about a flu shot clinic that had already come and gone. The automatic doors opened with a sigh, and the night air felt colder than it had on the way in. Helen didn't talk until we were both buckled in. Then she gripped the wheel and said, I'm calling you tomorrow morning. If you don't answer, I'm coming over. I'll answer, I said, and I'll be fine. You sound like every stubborn patient I've ever chased down a hallway, she replied. This isn't pride, George. This is your life. We drove in silence for a few blocks. The town looked different at night. Storefront lights glowing on empty sidewalks, the neon open sign at the diner buzzing like a tired insect. I watched the slow flash of the traffic light at Pine and 3rd, and for a second I felt the ache rise again, tight as a belt pulled one hole farther than it should go. I shifted in my seat and tried to breathe through it. You okay? Helen asked, not looking at me. Yeah, I lied. Just tired. At my house, she walked me to the door like she was delivering a fragile package. She stepped inside and put the prescription bottle on the counter, then filled a glass of water and slid it toward me. Take one. Now I took one. She watched to make sure I swallowed. Then she wrote her number again on the back of the discharge paper, even though it was already saved in my phone, on a magnet, and in my head. Put this by your chair, she said, where you can see it. I'll call if it gets worse. You'll call if anything changes at all, she corrected. Worse, different, sudden, scary, anything. She looked around my kitchen, as if the room itself might try to argue with her. Do not try to be heroic. Heroes are buried on schedule. After she left, the house settled into its usual quiet. The tick of the baseboard heat, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faraway sound of a car on the next street. I rinsed the glass and left it by the sink, then carried the pill bottle into the living room and set it on the end table beside my chair. I didn't feel like climbing the stairs. I told myself it was because I didn't want to wake my knees. I knew better. I turned on the radio for company, one of those late-night shows where the host sounds like he's talking to you alone. He played an old Sam Cooke song, and I remembered slow dancing in a kitchen a lifetime ago, my wife's head on my shoulder, her breath warm on my neck. The ache in my chest shifted, less sharp now, more like a pressure that wanted to be noticed without making a scene. I breathed with it and tried not to wake it up. On the bookshelf across the room, a framed photo of my father caught the lamplight. He's got his cap tilted, one hand on my shoulder, both of us grinning with a fish we were too proud of. I thought of the night he died at the table, the way my mother said his name twice, first like a question, then like a plea. I'd always told myself I would know if something that serious was happening to me. I would feel it. I would recognize it. But what if you don't? What if it sneaks up on you while you're busy telling yourself not to make a fuss? I dozed and woke and dozed again, the way you do in a chair that fits your shape because you've sat there too many nights. Once, near midnight, I dreamed I was swinging the mall. The weekend passed in a kind of uneasy truce between my body and my mind. I took the pills doctor Webb had given me, swallowed them with water Helen had set out, and told myself they were helping. But every time I moved too quickly, or bent down, or stood up, the pressure reminded me it was still there, waiting. I kept the radio on low to fill the quiet, but even the oldies couldn't chase off the nagging voice in the back of my head that whispered, "What if Helen is right?" Saturday was uneventful. I stayed home, rested, avoided the woodpile like Helen ordered. I shuffled around the kitchen, made toast, poured coffee, read the paper. But I felt old in a way I never had before. Not just the number, 73, but fragile, like the world had put me on notice. Every twinge made me wonder if it was the start of something worse. Helen called twice that day, once in the morning and once before bed. "How are you doing?" she demanded each time. "Any pain? Shortness of breath? Did you try the stairs?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." "George, tired is a symptom too. I promise, if it gets worse, I'll call you." She didn't sound satisfied, but she let it go. For the moment. Sunday went much the same. A neighbor dropped off soup, word having spread that I wasn't feeling well. I hated being the subject of neighborhood gossip, but part of me was grateful someone cared. I ate the soup, tried to read a book, dozed in the chair. The ache stayed quiet, like an animal hiding in the brush, but I could feel it watching. Monday morning it struck. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee, the paper folded open to the crossword. One moment I was looking at a 7-letter word for ancient city, and the next it felt like a vice had clamped down on my chest. Not the dull ache of before, but a crushing pain that stole every breath. My cup clattered to the table as I grabbed the edge, heart hammering, jaw burning, my left arm heavy and useless. I fumbled for the phone. My hands were clumsy, slick with sweat. Somehow I managed to hit the right button, and Helen answered on the second ring. "George?" I couldn't speak at first. All I could manage was a ragged gasp. "Help!" I croaked. "I'm on my way." "Hold on." The rest blurred. At some point she was beside me, her hand gripping mine, her voice steady in my ear. Then paramedics, their uniforms sharp against the blur of my kitchen, their voices clipped and urgent. A mask over my face, cool air rushing, needles, straps, wheels bumping over the threshold. The siren rising, falling, echoing through the streets. "George, stay with us," Helen said, her hand still holding mine as the ambulance rocked. "We're almost there." I remember flashes, the fluorescent lights rushing past overhead, the sting in my arm as medication flowed, the weight on my chest refusing to lift. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but the words stuck. The world narrowed to the thump of my heart, each beat like a drum that might stop at any second. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a different place. The air smelled of antiseptic, machines beeped steadily around me, and figures in scrubs moved with practiced speed. A woman's voice, calm but firm, cut through it all. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Reyes. You've had a heart attack. We need to get you to the cath lab right away." Her face came into focus. Mid-50s, streaks of gray in her hair, eyes that had seen this before. Not the smooth confidence of youth, but the steady assurance of someone who knew the terrain. "But," the doctor said. My voice cracked. Helen's face appeared beside hers, fierce and protective. "Forget what that boy said." "You listened to her," Dr. Reyes nodded once. "Your tests show a severe blockage. We're going to do an angioplasty. It's the best way to restore blood flow quickly. Do you understand?" I managed a weak nod. "What happens if we don't?" "You won't survive another day or two," she said bluntly. "We need to act now." The gurney moved, wheels clattering, doors swinging open. The ceiling tiles blurred above me. Nurses adjusted IV lines, murmured codes to one another, checked monitors. I caught fragments. LAD 95%. Classic Widowmaker. Move fast. I wanted to ask questions, but fear had stolen my words. I gripped the side rails, knuckles white, as if holding on could keep me tethered to this world. The cath lab was bright, cold, humming with machines. A mask covered my mouth. Wires trailed across my chest. Monitors flickered with numbers I didn't understand. Dr. Reyes leaned over me, her voice calm. "You'll be awake, but you may feel pressure. We'll go in through your wrist. Stay still." I felt a prick, then a strange pressure as something slid inside. The screen above me showed a map of glowing rivers, my arteries, lit up for everyone to see. Even I could tell something was wrong. One river pinched almost shut, the flow a trickle. Dr. Reyes pointed. "There it is. The blockage." She worked quickly, her hands steady, her eyes focused. "Balloon going in," someone announced. A moment later, the pressure in my chest shifted, sharp, then easing, like a knot slowly untying. Stent deployed. The room exhaled. Machines beeped in a rhythm that suddenly felt less ominous. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When I woke in recovery, Helen was there. She looked tired, her hair pulled back hastily, but her eyes were bright with relief. "You're still here," she said, squeezing my hand. "I feel better," I admitted. The crushing weight was gone, replaced by a soreness that seemed almost merciful. Dr. Reyes appeared not long after, her tone brisk but kind. "You had a 95% blockage in your left anterior descending artery. We placed a stent. You were very lucky, Mr. Mitchell. If you'd waited another day, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I thought of Friday night, of Dr. Webb's dismissive smile, his prescription pad scratching across the page. But he said, "It was just age." Dr. Reyes's expression darkened. "Chest pain is never just age, especially not with your history and symptoms. Any competent doctor should have ordered an EKG and enzymes immediately." Helen folded her arms. "That's what I told him." Dr. Reyes gave her a nod of respect. "You saved his life." Helen snorted. "He saved his own life by dialing my number." I closed my eyes, the beeping steady in the background, and let the truth settle in. I had come within inches of being another old man who just got tired, another obituary with a line about sudden heart failure, and all because someone thought 73 was an explanation instead of a warning. The hours that followed were a blur of wires, tubes, and nurses adjusting things I couldn't name. Every few minutes someone came in to check my vitals, to shine a light in my eyes, to ask how the pain was. It was better, but exhaustion weighed me down. The adrenaline crash left me hollow, like I'd been emptied out. Helen refused to leave. She sat in the chair by my bed, arms folded, occasionally dozing but always waking when a monitor beeped or a nurse entered. When I asked why she wasn't going home to sleep, she fixed me with that nurse's stare again. Because I don't trust anyone else to make sure they don't dismiss you again. I'll stay until I know you're safe. I wanted to argue, but part of me was grateful. The sight of her, upright and watchful, anchored me in that sterile room. Later that evening, Doctor. Reyes returned, this time with a folder in her hands. She pulled up a chair, a gesture that told me the conversation was serious. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed your case notes from Friday night. I want to be honest with you. The care you received then was inadequate. You had textbook symptoms of acute coronary syndrome, yet no EKG, no blood work, no X-ray was done. You were sent home with a bottle of anti-inflammatories. That's not acceptable. Helen leaned forward. That's what I told him. He almost killed George with arrogance. Dr. Reyes didn't disagree. I've already reported the case to the department head. There will be a review. She paused, then added more softly. I know you don't want to cause trouble, Mr. Mitchell, but cases like yours are important. They highlight systemic issues. Bias against older patients is a real problem in medicine, and it nearly cost you your life. Her words hit me harder than the heart attack itself. Bias. Not science, not evidence, not probability. Bias. The next morning, a hospital administrator came by. Polished suit, careful smile. He asked me to recount my Friday night experience in detail. Helen added her own version, blunt and uncompromising. The administrator took notes, nodding gravely, assuring us it would all be looked into. I wasn't sure if that meant anything, but Helen seemed satisfied that at least a record existed. When he left, I asked Helen why she was pushing so hard. She sighed and rubbed her forehead. Because this isn't just about you, George. Every day, older patients get dismissed. How many don't have a loudmouth neighbor to argue for them? How many die quietly at home because someone like Webb decided their pain was just age? Her words sat heavy in the room. I thought of my father again, the way he died at 68. How much of that was fate, and how much might have been different if someone had listened sooner? As the days passed, my strength returned bit by bit. The soreness eased. The monitors became background noise instead of constant threats. Nurses taught me breathing exercises, how to move carefully, how to sit up without straining. Dr. Reyes checked in daily, her calm presence a counterpoint to the chaos I'd seen in the ER. She explained the stent in simple terms. It's like a scaffold, holding the artery open. Blood flows freely now, but you must respect it. Medication, diet, follow-up. I listened, because this time someone spoke to me like I mattered. Not just an old man, but a patient worth saving. One afternoon, I found Helen writing furiously in a notebook. What's that? I asked. Complaint letter, she said. I'm listing every mistake Webb made. If the hospital doesn't act, I'll go to the board. Or the papers. Helen, don't... George, she interrupted. He nearly killed you. Do you want him doing the same thing to someone else's father, brother, neighbor? I didn't have an answer. She returned to her writing, jaw set like stone. By Wednesday, I could walk the hallway with a nurse at my side. Each step felt like defiance, a statement that I wasn't done yet. When I passed the nurses' station, some of them smiled and nodded as if silently cheering me on. It was a small thing, but it mattered. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just old age on legs. I was George Mitchell, still alive, still walking. That night, as the monitors clicked softly and the hallway lights dimmed, I thought about how close I'd come. 2 days earlier, I'd been a step away from a coffin. Now I lay in a hospital bed, chest aching but heart beating strong, because someone had chosen to see me as a man with symptoms, not just an age on a chart. By Thursday morning, I felt almost human again. The soreness was still there, a reminder of the stent and the rough journey my heart had taken, but the crushing pressure was gone. Breathing felt easier, lighter. For the first time in days, I could take a full breath without wincing. Helen arrived with a bag of grapes and her ever-present notebook. She fussed with my blanket, set the grapes on the tray, and then settled into the chair like she owned it. "You're looking better," she said. "Color's back in your face. You don't look like a ghost anymore." "Thanks," I muttered, plucking a grape from the stem. "High praise." She smirked, but the lines around her eyes softened. "Better than the alternative." I popped the grape into my mouth and chewed slowly. "So, what's in the notebook today?" "Another complaint?" Helen closed it quickly, almost guiltily. "Notes." "Notes?" "About what happened." "About Webb. About age bias in hospitals. I'm not letting this go, George. You nearly died because a doctor thought you were just old." I sighed. "Helen. Don't Helen me. You know I'm right." She leaned forward. "And you know how many people don't have a neighbor like me? How many don't have anyone to fight for them? You got lucky. Others won't." I didn't argue. Not because I agreed entirely, but because she had a way of bulldozing through words until you either yielded or risked being flattened. That evening, I had another visitor. When the door opened, I expected Dr. Reyes, but instead in walked Dr. Webb. He looked different than he had Friday night. Less polished, less sure. His scrubs were wrinkled, his expression tight. He hovered near the foot of the bed like a schoolboy about to confess a broken window. "Mr. Mitchell," he began, "I heard you were admitted with a cardiac event." "I wanted to check on you." Helen bristled instantly. "A cardiac event? Try a heart attack. 95% blockage. Widowmaker." Webb swallowed, glanced at her, then back at me. "Yes. I understand that now." I studied him. He looked younger than ever, like the weight of the past few days had stripped away the confident veneer. "You sent me home," I said quietly. "You told me it was just age." His lips pressed together. Clinical diagnosis can be difficult in elderly patients. Symptoms overlap with many benign conditions. "I misjudged." "Misjudged?" Helen's voice sharpened like a knife. "You nearly killed him." Webb flinched, but he didn't argue. "I've spoken with the department chief. I'll be undergoing review and additional training. I came to apologize, Mr. Mitchell. I wanted to feel anger, to lash out, but mostly I felt tired." "You made me feel like I was wasting your time," I said, "like I was just an old man complaining about creaky bones." "That's worse than being wrong. That's being dismissive." His face colored. "I understand that now." "I'm sorry," Helen snorted. "Sorry won't bring back the patients who don't get second chances." Webb lowered his gaze. "I'll do better." He left soon after, leaving a silence in his wake. Helen shook her head. "He still doesn't get it. He thinks it's about being wrong. It's about bias. He sees age, not symptoms. That's dangerous." The next morning, Dr. Reyes came by during rounds. "I heard, Doctor. Webb visited you," she said. "He apologized," I said. "Sort of." Her expression was unreadable. "He's under review. Dr. Morrison, our department chief, wants to speak with you personally." Later that day, Dr. Morrison arrived. He was older than Webb, probably early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a measured way of speaking. He introduced himself, then sat down beside my bed. That simple act, sitting, already set him apart from Webb. It meant he wasn't rushing. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "I've reviewed your case. The care you received on Friday night was inadequate. You should have received an EKG, cardiac enzymes, and a chest X-ray. None of that was done. That's unacceptable." I shifted, uncomfortable with the directness. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble." "This isn't about punishment," Morrison said. "It's about patient safety. When our doctors miss things, we need to understand why. We need to correct it. Dr. Webb will be retrained and supervised more closely for the next 6 months." Helen leaned forward. "And what about all the other patients dismissed like George?" Morrison met her eyes. "We're reviewing our protocols." Chest pain in elderly patients will now automatically trigger a cardiac workup. No exceptions. That gave me pause. Because of me? Because of your case, Morrison said. Sometimes it takes a near miss to remind us of the basics. I want to apologize personally. You deserved better. For a long moment I couldn't speak. The idea that my ordeal might change something, even a small policy in one hospital, was overwhelming. Finally I managed, "Thank you." When he left, Helen looked triumphant. "See? This matters. Your story matters." I rubbed my temple. "I'm not a crusader, Helen. You don't have to be. You just have to tell the truth. People will listen." That night, as I lay awake in the dim light of the monitors, I thought about what she said. I thought about my father, about Jack, about the neighbors who had their own stories of being dismissed. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe silence was just another kind of surrender. By Friday, discharge day, I was strong enough to walk without assistance. Dr. Reyes gave me instructions, medications, diet, exercise plan. And follow-ups, she emphasized. You're not done. Recovery is a process, not an event. Helen drove me home, carrying my bag inside like she was moving a fragile antique. She unpacked my pills, lined them on the counter, taped my discharge instructions to the fridge. "I'll check on you daily," she said firmly. "Don't argue." I didn't. Arguing with Helen was like trying to hold back the tide with a broom. That weekend, neighbors stopped by. Mrs. Patterson from across the street brought cookies. Bob Martinez asked if I needed help with the lawn. Dorothy, one of Helen's friends, came with a casserole. Each one, after expressing relief that I was still alive, had a story. A misdiagnosis, a dismissal, a just old age explanation that nearly cost them. I listened, realizing how common my experience was. How many of us were walking warnings, unseen until it was too late. That Sunday, I called my daughter Jennifer in Seattle. She listened quietly as I recounted everything. The pain, the ER, doctor, Webb, the heart attack, doctor, Reyes. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Dad," she said finally, her voice tight, "that's medical ageism. It's a real problem. My clients face it all the time." Her words carried weight. Jennifer wasn't just my daughter. She was a social worker who advocated for elderly patients. If she called it ageism, that's what it was. "What should I do?" I asked. "Tell your story. People need to hear it. Other patients, families, doctors. Ageism kills, Dad. Your experience proves it." I thought of Helen, of Morrison, of Dr. Webb's apology. Maybe it was time. Maybe my story could be more than a close call. Maybe it could be a warning. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long," Jennifer replied. "Others don't have the luxury." After I hung up with Jennifer, I sat for a long while in my chair, staring at the pill bottles lined up like soldiers on the counter. Each one represented survival, but also a reminder that I wasn't invincible. For years, I'd thought strength was measured in how much weight I could lift, how many hours I could work, how many storms I could weather without asking for help. Now it seemed strength might mean something else entirely. Admitting vulnerability, listening, accepting care. Helen stopped by later that evening, as she always did. She brought soup and her sharp tongue. "You talked to Jennifer?" she asked, setting bowls on the table. "Yes. And?" "She thinks I should tell my story." Helen gave a triumphant little snort. "Smart woman." "Takes after her mother," I smiled faintly. "She said ageism kills." "It does," Helen said flatly. "I saw it my whole career. Old patients dismissed, ignored, treated like background noise. Sometimes they survived anyway. Sometimes they didn't. But it was never fair." Her eyes softened then. "George, you matter. Your story matters. Don't let Webb's arrogance make you feel small. Use it to make noise." That night, lying in bed, I kept hearing the word noise. I'd always been the kind of man who preferred quiet. Steady work, steady life, no fuss. but maybe fuss was exactly what was needed. The following Monday, Doctor. Morrison called me at home. Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to follow up. We've implemented a new policy in our ER. All chest pain in elderly patients now triggers an automatic workup. EKG, enzymes, imaging. No exceptions. I was stunned. That quickly? Your case made the danger clear, Morrison said. Protocols are supposed to protect patients. Sometimes it takes a near miss to remind us why we have them. I also want to thank you for speaking candidly. Not all patients do. After the call, I sat in the kitchen with Helen, telling her what he said. She nodded. Good. But that's just one hospital. This happens everywhere. Jennifer said the same, I admitted. She called it systemic. Helen raised an eyebrow. She's right. Which is why you need to share your story beyond this kitchen. Over the next week, I found myself turning the idea over like a stone in my pocket. Could I really? Did anyone care about the voice of an old construction worker from Pine Street? Wouldn't people dismiss me the way Webb had? One evening, I asked Jennifer again, this time over video call. Her face filled the screen, serious and intent. Dad, listen to me. You almost died because of medical bias. If you share your story, even if it only makes one doctor hesitate before dismissing another older patient, it will matter. Even if it only makes one family push for tests, it will matter. I hesitated. I don't know if I can write it. Then talk it out. Helen can help. I can help. We'll make sure it's clear and strong. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone. Please, Dad. Do this. For yourself and for others. I promised I would think seriously about it. And for once I meant it. In the meantime, I focused on recovery. Cardiac rehab started at the hospital gym, where I joined a handful of others in sweats and sneakers, all of us moving slowly but determinedly on treadmills and stationary bikes. We looked like an odd little club, bonded by stents and scars. The nurse leading the session encouraged us, monitored us, pushed us gently. Each step I took felt like defiance, but also like proof. I was alive, and I could get stronger again. At home, neighbors kept stopping by, each with their own story of dismissal. Mrs. Patterson described how her gallbladder attack had been brushed off as indigestion until she collapsed. Bob Martinez told of a broken bone mistaken for arthritis. Dorothy recalled being told her fatigue was just getting older until tests revealed anemia. Their voices echoed Jennifer's. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern. One afternoon, Helen sat across from me with her notebook open. I've been collecting these stories, she said. Yours, theirs, mine. If you won't write yours, maybe we'll gather them all. Make people see the scope I watched her, realizing she was as relentless in this fight as she had been at my bedside. Maybe more. And I felt a spark, small but real. Maybe we really could make a difference. 2 weeks after coming home, I sat at my kitchen table with Helen and Jennifer. Jennifer on video call, Helen with her notebook. The three of us formed an unlikely committee, bound by anger, survival, and a stubborn belief that something needed to change. We'll start with your story, Jennifer said, plain and simple. What happened to you, what the ER doctor said, what nearly killed you, and how bias played a role. People respond to personal stories more than statistics. Helen nodded vigorously. Don't dress it up. Just tell the truth. The truth is enough. I hesitated, fingers drumming on the table. What if people think I'm just an old man complaining? They won't, Jennifer said firmly. And if they do, they're part of the problem. This isn't about pride. It's about survival. So I began talking. Slowly at first, halting, uncertain. But Helen took notes, and Jennifer asked questions, and soon the story spilled out. The woodpile, the pain, Helen's insistence, the ER, Webb's dismissive tone, the heart attack, the stent, the recovery. By the time I finished, my throat felt raw. That's it, Helen said softly. That's the story. Jennifer leaned closer to her camera. Now write it down. I'll edit. We'll send it to the local paper. They're always looking for human interest stories, especially ones that shine a light on healthcare issues I wasn't sure. The idea of my name in print made me uneasy, but Helen's gaze pinned me, and Jennifer's voice urged me forward. Finally, I agreed. The following week, the article ran. The headline read, "When old age isn't a diagnosis, one man's near-fatal encounter with medical ageism." My picture, a simple shot Helen had taken of me on the porch, sat above the text. The story was mine, but the reach was larger than I'd imagined. The phone started ringing that afternoon. Neighbors, friends, strangers. Some called to say they were glad I survived. Others called to say, "That happened to me too." A man down the street said his wife's stroke had been brushed off as anxiety until it was too late. A woman from 2 towns over wrote a letter about her father's heart attack, dismissed twice before it killed him. Stories poured in like water through a broken dam. Helen collected them in her notebook, one after another. "See?" she said, tapping the pages. "You're not alone." And now people are speaking up. But it wasn't just patients. Doctors and nurses responded too, some defensive, insisting that protocols were followed, that errors were rare. But many thanked me for sharing, admitted that age bias was real, confessed they had seen it themselves and wanted to do better. One evening, Dr. Reyes called. "Mr. Mitchell, your article is being discussed in our department meetings. It's sparking real conversations. Thank you for speaking out." I swallowed hard. "Do you think it will matter?" "It already is," she said. "Awareness is the first step. Change comes after." A week later, a letter arrived from the hospital's quality committee, thanking me for highlighting the need for unbiased diagnostic practices. They credited my story with helping shape the new chest pain protocol. It felt strange, seeing my ordeal turned into policy language, but it felt good too. Then, one afternoon, Dr. Webb called. His voice was hesitant. "Mr. Mitchell, I read your article. I was wondering if we could meet. I'd like to talk." My first instinct was to hang up, but something in his tone, uncertain, almost humbled, made me pause. "All right," I said finally. "Coffee shop." Neutral ground. We met the next day. He looked different out of scrubs, jeans, a plain shirt, no stethoscope armor. He sat across from me, hands clasped, eyes uneasy. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I wanted to say again that I'm sorry. Reading your article, it forced me to confront the assumptions I made. I realized I treated you differently because of your age. If you'd been 40, I would have run every test." I studied him. "Why didn't you?" He shifted. "Because in medical school and residency, we see so many elderly patients with vague complaints. We're told to weigh cost, probability, likelihood. I developed a shortcut. Too quick, too certain. Your story showed me how dangerous that shortcut is." I stayed quiet, letting him sit with the weight of his own words. Finally, he said, "I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to do better. I've already changed my approach. And I was wondering, would you be willing to speak to our residents? Help them understand the patient side of bias?" The request startled me. Me, talking to young doctors? The thought seemed absurd. But then I remembered Jennifer's words. Even if it only makes one doctor hesitate, it will matter. "I'll think about it," I said. The next week, I found myself standing in a small lecture room at the hospital. Rows of residents in white coats looked at me with varying degrees of interest. Dr. Webb introduced me, then stepped aside. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. But once I started talking, the words came. I told them about the woodpile, about the pain, about the ER and the dismissal, about the heart attack, the stent, the recovery, about the feeling of being treated like a number, not a man. "If I'd been younger," I said, "you would have listened. But age made you assume." That assumption nearly killed me. The room was quiet when I finished. Then a resident raised her hand. "Mr. Mitchell, What would you want us to remember when treating elderly patients? I thought for a moment. That we're not just old versions of younger people. We know our bodies. We know when something's wrong. Listen to us. Don't assume age explains everything. Another asked, how do we check ourselves against bias? Ask yourself, I said. If this patient were 50 years younger, would I do anything differently? If the answer is yes, then you need to reconsider. They nodded, scribbling notes. For the first time, I felt like maybe my voice mattered. Weeks passed. Letters continued to arrive. One from a 79-year-old woman who insisted on further tests after reading my article. Tests that revealed appendicitis. Another from an 81-year-old man whose memory problems turned out to be a treatable deficiency. Each story felt like a small victory, proof that speaking up had ripples. Helen beamed each time she read a new letter aloud. See, George? You're saving lives now. I wasn't sure about that. But I knew I was part of something bigger than myself. And for once, that felt right. The days after the article ran were a whirlwind. The editor of the local paper called to thank me, saying the piece had generated more mail than anything they'd run in months. Some letters praised me. Some criticized the hospital. Some questioned why older patients weren't given the same priority as younger ones. But nearly all of them said the same thing. This is happening everywhere. Helen clipped the letters from the paper and taped them into her notebook, muttering as she worked. Evidence, she said. Every story, every letter. Proof this isn't just one cranky old man. At first, the attention made me uncomfortable. People recognized me at the grocery store, stopped me on the sidewalk, asked how I was feeling. Some wanted to share their own experiences, pouring out stories in the produce aisle or the parking lot. It was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. I realized I wasn't alone. None of us were. One afternoon, I received an envelope from a retired doctor. Inside was a handwritten letter. Mr. Mitchell, it read, I practiced medicine for 40 years. I regret to say that age bias is real, and I saw it too often. Thank you for speaking up. You may save lives that statistics alone could not. I sat with that letter for a long time, the weight of it heavy in my hands. When Webb invited me to speak to the residents, I nearly said no. The thought of standing in front of a room full of young doctors made my stomach churn, but Helen shoved me toward it. George, they need to hear it from you. They need to see the face of the man who almost died because of their assumptions. So I went, and I spoke, and to my surprise, they listened. The session stretched longer than expected. The residents asked question after question. How do you think patients can advocate for themselves better? One asked. Bring someone with you, I replied. Someone who won't be brushed off. I had Helen. Without her, I might not be here. Another asked, what made you finally agree to come back after being dismissed? I swallowed. Because the pain was worse than my pride. But many won't make that choice. They'll stay home. And they'll die. The room grew quiet at that. I saw some of them glance at each other, unease flickering in their eyes. Maybe, just maybe, the point had landed. Afterward, one young doctor lingered behind. She approached me hesitantly. Mr. Mitchell, thank you. My grandmother died after her chest pain was dismissed as indigestion. I became a doctor because of that, but I still catch myself assuming sometimes. Your story reminded me why I'm here. Her words stayed with me long after I left. Back home, Helen poured tea and said, well, how was it? Terrifying, I admitted. Then, after a pause, worth it, she grinned. Told you. The ripple effects kept coming. A regional health magazine picked up the story. Then a local TV station asked for an interview. I sat under bright studio lights, answering questions from a reporter who seemed genuinely concerned. Do you think medical ageism is common? She asked. Yes, I said simply. Too common. And too often, it's deadly. After the broadcast, the calls and letters doubled. An elderly woman wrote, because of you, I demanded an EKG when the doctor tried to send me home. They found a blockage. Another said, "My husband's doctor kept saying he was just slowing down with age. We pushed for tests. He has treatable heart disease. Thank you." Each letter was a reminder that my close call wasn't just mine. It was part of something larger. And each one made me realize Helen was right all along. This story had to be told, not for me, but for all of us. The TV interview rattled me more than I expected. When the camera's red light blinked on, I felt exposed, as though the whole world could see the lines on my face, the tremor in my hands. But afterward, people stopped me on the street, not with pity, but with respect. "You're the man from the news," they'd say. "Thank you for speaking up," Dr. Reyes called again. "I saw your interview," she said warmly. "You did well." Patients' voices are powerful. Sometimes they can shift perspectives faster than any medical lecture. I wasn't sure about that, but I felt something shift inside me. For so long I had been George Mitchell, worker, neighbor, father, widower. Now, strangely, I was becoming George Mitchell, advocate. It felt strange, heavy, but also right. Helen beamed every time she saw another letter arrive. "You're making waves," she said proudly. Jennifer echoed it too. "Dad, I'm proud of you," she told me on our next call. "Not just for surviving, but for speaking. You're giving voice to what so many of my clients can't." I sat with that for a long time. Maybe this was what survival meant. Not just living, but making sure others got the chance to as well. A year after the heart attack, I stood behind a podium at a regional cardiology conference, staring out at a sea of white coats. The audience was larger than anything I'd ever faced. Hundreds of doctors, nurses, administrators. My knees trembled, my palms sweated, but Helen's words rang in my head. "Make noise." I told my story again, plain and simple. The woodpile, the ER, the dismissal, the heart attack, the stent. I told them what it felt like to be brushed aside, to be told my pain was just old age. I told them how close I had come to being another obituary, another statistic. "The most important thing I want you to remember," I said, voice steady now, "is that age is not a diagnosis. When an older patient tells you they are in pain, listen. Ask yourself, if this patient were 50 years younger, what would I do differently? And if the answer is anything at all, then you must change your approach." When I finished, the applause startled me. Doctors stood, clapped, some even whistled. A cardiologist approached afterward, thanking me. "Your words cut through in a way medical data doesn't," he said. "We need to hear this." On the drive home, Helen sat beside me, grinning like a proud parent. "Told you," she said. "Noise." In the months that followed, my role grew. The hospital invited me to join their patient advisory committee. We reviewed cases where elderly patients might have been shortchanged, made recommendations for new protocols, and spoke openly about bias. Sometimes the meetings were frustrating, slow progress, endless paperwork. But each time a policy shifted, I felt a small victory. Jennifer flew in to visit one weekend. She hugged me hard, her eyes shining. "Dad, I tell your story to my clients all the time. It gives them courage to demand tests, to speak up. I never thought my stubborn survival would ripple this far. But it had. Still, the stories kept coming. Helen's friend Margaret, dismissed with anxiety, later revealed to be having a stroke. A man in the next town whose chest pain was brushed off until his widow spoke up. Each story reminded me the work wasn't done. One evening, I sat with Helen on the porch. The summer air was warm, cicadas buzzing. "Do you ever feel tired of fighting?" I asked. She looked out at the street, thoughtful. "Every day. But then I remember you almost died because someone didn't take you seriously. And then I remember all the others who didn't make it. And I know we can't stop." I nodded. The weight of survival pressed on me, but so did the responsibility. I wasn't just George Mitchell, construction worker. I was George Mitchell, survivor, advocate, noisemaker. 2 years after the heart attack, I received another invitation to speak at a medical school. The thought of addressing students just beginning their careers was daunting, but I went. I stood before them and told my story once again, emphasizing what Dr. Reyes had said. Bias is unconscious, but it kills just the same. I looked at their young faces and said, when you look at an older patient, don't see age. See risk, see possibility. See a person who deserves the same care as anyone else. Some of them nodded. Some looked uncomfortable, but I hoped the words stuck. At home, life settled into a rhythm. Cardiac rehab became exercise walks around the block, tending to the garden, evenings on the porch with Helen. I was 75 now, healthier than I'd been at 73, because I had been forced to confront mortality and change. But the fear never fully left. Sometimes at night, lying in bed, I remembered the vice on my chest, the crushing pain, the helplessness. I remembered Webb's dismissive smile, and I wondered how many others hadn't made it past that night. That fear fueled me. It kept me telling the story again and again to anyone who would listen. Because the truth was simple. Ageism in medicine was real, and it was deadly. And silence was no longer an option. I didn't know how many lives my words had touched, or how much change had truly been made. But I knew this. As long as I had breath, I would keep making noise. For my father, for Jack, for Helen's friends, for every patient who was told they were just old. And most of all, for myself. Because survival meant more than living. It meant fighting for the chance for others to live too. The conference itself had been nerve-wracking. When I walked into the grand hall, the buzz of voices nearly knocked me back. Doctors milled about with laptops and clipboards, nurses carried tote bags stuffed with pamphlets, and banners about innovations in cardiology hung from the walls. I felt like a fish out of water, a construction worker in a sea of medical minds. But Dr. Reyes walked with me to the podium, her hand steady on my shoulder, whispering, "You belong here." After my talk, a panel discussion followed. Several doctors admitted on stage that they had dismissed older patients too quickly in the past. One nurse described breaking down in tears after losing a patient she'd insisted was fine. The honesty surprised me. For once, the wall of authority cracked, and humanity shone through. Later, in the hallway, a young resident approached. "Mr. Mitchell, your words changed how I'll practice. My grandfather died of a misdiagnosed heart attack. I always blamed him for not pushing harder. Now I realize it wasn't his job. It was ours." Her confession shook me. I gripped her hand and said, "Then carry him with you. Let his memory make you better." The advisory committee work was slower, but steady. We examined case reports, sometimes grim, sometimes uplifting. One case involved an 80-year-old woman who had been sent home twice before tests revealed pneumonia. Another was a man with dizziness dismissed as dehydration, but later diagnosed with arrhythmia. Each story was painful, but each one taught us something. We recommended clearer checklists, automatic testing triggers, and patient advocates present in the ER. Not everything passed quickly. Bureaucracy never does, but some changes stuck. At home, I kept receiving letters. One from a woman in Ohio who saw my story online and pushed her father's doctor for a second opinion. He ended up needing surgery. Another from a man in Florida who said he carried my article in his wallet to show doctors when they brushed him off. Helen read them aloud with satisfaction. "See, George? You're a symbol now." I wasn't sure I liked being a symbol, but I couldn't deny the ripple effect. Jennifer's visit that summer was a balm. She bustled into the house, hugging me fiercely, filling the rooms with her energy. Over dinner, she said, "Dad, I tell your story to my clients. It gives them language to push back. They'll say, 'I'm not just old, I want tests like George got.' And it works." Her pride warmed me, but also humbled me. I never set out to be anyone's example. I just wanted to survive. Helen, of course, never stopped pushing. One evening, she waved another article draft in my face. "You're going to submit this to a national magazine," she declared. "Helen," I protested. "No buts." The local paper was just the beginning. "This needs to go farther." She was relentless, but I knew she was right. The medical school talk was another test of courage. Standing before rows of students, I felt ancient. Their faces were smooth, their energy buzzing. I told them my story, watched as some shifted uncomfortably. Then came the questions. "How can we make older patients feel heard?" one asked. "Sit down," I said. "Look them in the eye. Don't rush. Half the battle is making us feel like people, not burdens." Another asked, "What should we do when families demand tests we think are unnecessary?" "Listen," I replied. "Families know the patient better than you. Don't dismiss them. You might find they're pointing you exactly where you need to look." The most difficult question came from a quiet young man. "Mr. Mitchell, how did it feel knowing a doctor didn't value your life the same way he'd value a younger patient's?" I swallowed hard. It felt like being erased. Like my years, my work, my love for my family meant nothing. Don't ever make a patient feel that way. The room went still. I hoped that silence meant the lesson had landed. Life at home remained steady, though quieter. My walks grew longer, my breath stronger. Helen and I sat often on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes she'd ask, "Do you regret speaking out?" I'd shake my head. "No, the opposite. I regret waiting so long." The truth was, I was still afraid. Of another heart attack, of being dismissed again, of not being believed. But that fear became fuel. It kept me speaking, writing, advocating. Because if fear silenced me, then Webb's dismissal would win after all. 2 years after the heart attack, I attended another conference, this time as part of a panel. I listened as doctors discussed new training modules on age bias, some citing my story directly. Hearing my name in that context was surreal. But it meant change was happening, slowly but surely. At night, lying in bed, I often thought of my father. How he'd died at 68, his complaints brushed aside. I thought of Jack, of neighbors, of strangers whose letters I held in a box. I thought of Helen, fierce and loyal, who had saved me not just with a ride to the hospital, but with her refusal to let me vanish into silence. Survival, I realized, wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. It was about insisting that age was not an excuse for neglect. It was about making sure our voices carried, even when shaky. So I kept telling the story, again and again, to doctors, to students, to patients, to families. Because every retelling was a shield, every word a hammer striking at the wall of bias. And maybe, just maybe, enough noise could break it down. Helen never slowed down either. She organized a community meeting at the library, inviting neighbors, retirees, and even a few doctors willing to listen. I watched as she stood at the front, reading stories from her notebook. Her voice was sharp, clear, unwavering. "These are not complaints," she said. "They are warnings." Each one could have been prevented if doctors had listened. The room erupted in murmurs, nods, and a few tears. I sat in the back, humbled. Helen had become a warrior, and in her fight she carried all of us. Jennifer, too, carried the torch. She began working with advocacy groups, using my story as a case study. "We need more education," she said during a call. "We need hospitals to teach young doctors about unconscious bias the way they teach them about anatomy. It's just as life or death." Her determination reminded me of her mother, gone too soon. I felt proud, but also grateful. If my close call gave her fuel for her work, then maybe it wasn't just misfortune. It was purpose. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered what my life would have been if Webb had ordered those tests that first night. Maybe I'd have had the stent earlier, avoided the ambulance, the heart attack, the fear. But then I wondered if I'd have spoken out, if I'd have joined committees, given talks, pushed for change. Perhaps pain had forged something necessary. One autumn evening, Helen and I sat watching the leaves fall. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with orange. I said, "You know, if I hadn't had you next door, I wouldn't be here." She smirked. "Damn right. You owe me pie for life." We laughed, but beneath the humor was truth. Helen's stubbornness had saved me. And it reminded me that survival is rarely solitary. We survive because others refuse to let us fall. Now, years later, I still take my pills each morning. I still walk the block, slower but steady. I still tell the story, sometimes to a crowd of doctors, sometimes to a single worried neighbor. Each time I see the flicker of recognition, the realization that age is not a diagnosis. And each time, I feel the same determination to keep making noise. For as long as I have breath, I will not let silence win. I sit with the quiet and remember why we spoke up, why we kept going, why we promised to listen, why we insisted that age is not a diagnosis, why the next voice deserves to be heard. I sit,